I'm really excited to talk to Jawad Mian. Jawad and I have known each other for a long time, and he's very inspirational in how he thinks about the world. And what I want you to get out of this is not a macro interview about what to think. It's a process of how to think and how to live your life and to get the things aligned that make a difference to you. And you'll get most out of yourself by doing so. So it's a philosophical journey through macro, and I really hope you enjoy it. Join me, Raoul Pal, as I go on a journey of discovery through the macro, crypto, and exponential age landscapes. In The Journeyman, I talk to the smartest people in the world so we can all become smarter together. Jawad, good to see you back on Real Vision finally.
Likewise, Raoul. It's been some time.
It has been some time. Look, I'm really looking forward to this conversation because you're just a fascinating person to talk to. You have a very different way of looking at things. And I think people will really appreciate how you think, not necessarily what you think, as I think you and I both agree. It's how people think that's a fascinating thing. But before we kick off, you've got a great story. So give us your story.
So I'm from Pakistan, born and raised in Dubai. And then I went to university in Canada. And that's where I began my career. Unlike most or some people in the industry, I didn't go to an Ivy League school. I didn't train at an investment bank. And I worked for a hedge fund. I started my career as a bank teller. But that was one of the best things that happened to me because in that role, you're forced to interact with anybody and everybody. And I was a very shy kid growing up, and that sort of helped me break out of my shell. And you learn pretty well, in a quiet neighborhood branch what a bank does, so research, asset management, private equity, investment banking. And I kind of like the idea of asset management where you're reading a lot, learning, understanding the world, but also can get feedback on your decision making. So I did my CFA, did my CMT, tried to maneuver my way into markets. I was a fund accountant for a couple of years.
Hold on. You're a bank teller in a small branch in Canada?
Yeah.
That's not a normal path to then think, I'm going to do my CFA and I'm going to get into their investment banking operations. What mindset did you have that you thought, you know what, I can do this? Talk me through that because it's fascinating.
I used to just pick up the phone and call people in the CIBC directory, right? I could see who was a portfolio manager, who was an investment banker. So I spoke to all of them. And there's this one person who met with me for coffee, and she told me this is the sort of the path that you need to move forward. So I just signed up for the CFA exam and read all the right books, right? The Market Wizards, the classics, the Money Game, the Soros Collection, and realized very quickly that I'm fascinated by the Kovner story, the Paul Tudor Jones and Druckenmiller story. So started thinking about the world in more macro terms. I enjoyed that much more than bottom-up company analysis. And so I didn't want to do equity research, which was at that time very much sector-specific. I wanted to be much more broad in my thinking and understanding of the world. So that was kind of what took me on that path of just learning. But it wasn't really until I joined as a fund accountant at CIBC Mellon where I finally met the Bloomberg terminal. And I fell in love with that machine, right? Just like, what is this? So I used to while other people would be listening to music doing their work, I used to listen to Bloomberg radio. I'd stay, for hours after work, just playing with the terminal, studying for my CFA exam. So that kind of got me through. And I think the work ethic and the discipline was really something that I took from my father, who was very hardworking and driven. So it was certainly something that I felt was innate to me, just to try to succeed. And once I've set my mind on something, to try my best to go out and achieve it.
And so what was it like when you started to then, what was that first job? So macro was, you decided, okay, this is how you think. It fits with the rhythm of your mind and how it works. Talk me through the first job and what you were doing and what you learn in that process, because there's a reality of, there's an expectations of reading The Alchemy of Finance, and there's a reality. How did the rubber hit the road at that point?
The first buy-side role was actually in Dubai in 2007. That's when I joined as a research analyst and moved to be a assistant PM. And that at that firm, they were doing a bunch of different things. They're running a global fund of hedge funds. They had a global equity fund. They had a Middle Eastern equity fund as well. So I was involved in all of those products, trying to get a better sense of how to think about markets. Um, there's also the time when, again, '07, right? So booming economy in the Middle East, is like a bubble in real estate. Commodities are really ripping higher. And so I started writing also at that time a blog just to make sense of what's going on. Because what I realized, moving to Dubai from Toronto, I could see the cascading sort of signs of an imminent crisis. And yet here we were like raising a luxury real estate fund and, being max equity. And so I started writing a blog about why I think, Dubai equities and real estate are overvalued. And that sort of helped me understand better, my thinking, my writing process. We had the products on one side, but then I was also writing to make sense of the world and sharing it publicly, and got feedback from that as well. Um, and that was really a fun experience for me, of just being involved and seeing the crisis unfold, be on the right side of it in my writings personally, but then being unable to do much about it within the firm because I was just a junior kid trying to speak to partners who were twice his age and who would listen to me. So I kind of realized that it's difficult, this working for other people, the conflict, the compromises one needs to make. And so my dad was an entrepreneur. So being there very early made me realize that I actually want to do my own thing as well. And at some point I felt like the naive Jawad, the idea was I used to joke with John Burbank, I want to pull a Burbank, like basically raise $1 million and set up my own fund. The same way Einhorn and, Tudor and Druckerman did it. That was sort of the idea at the back of my mind. So I used to go to these jobs and run money. At the end of the day, I wanted to do my own thing.
And so what did you do?
I told myself that whenever I have 3 years of savings, I'll quit and do my own thing. I reached that point in 2012. And I gave myself a 3-year cushion because I read somewhere that Stan Druckerman, it took him 3 years to make more money than his secretary. And then at the same time, Mark Twain said that you should write for 3 years. And if after 3 years, you're not making any money, sawing wood is what you're intended for. And so let me just give myself a 3-year cushion. It seemed like the best decision because, 3 years later, I'd still be, 31 and I have a CFA, I can go get another job. But at that time, I wanted to quit before getting married, before having kids or any liabilities. So I had tremendous flexibility. So I quit in 2012. And the idea was to, again, raise $1 million and launch a fund. I raised $1.5 million, but then I realized actually through that process, my heart wasn't into it. Something was changing within me and it just did not make sense. I could not articulate best at that time what it was, but I pulled the plug. And I started writing and reading at that time to just really explore. Because I realized I'm just this kid sitting in Dubai. Do I even know what's going on in the world? Do I even have a process? Let me sort of put that down on paper and see where things go. Let's connect with people from around the world, get their feedback. And so that was, late 2012, I quit. 2013 was the fundraising journey, realized actually I don't want to go ahead with the fund. And 2014 is when I started Stray Reflections and I started writing and flipped it into a business.
Hey, sorry to interrupt again. It's Raoul here from Real Vision. I'd love for you to subscribe to the channel, get the notifications. We have so many incredible conversations with so many amazing people. It will really help you in your financial journey and your journey to understand just what the hell's going on in this world. Anyway, click subscribe, get the notifications and enjoy. You approached it in a very interesting manner. Both you and I have been around this industry for a while and we know a lot of the same people. How you write is very different. How did you approach it? What did you think when you wanted to come into the business of writing and thinking? Because I think you approach it like I do, is like, it is a beautiful thing to be paid to think. How did you approach it? What did you think? Okay, what can I do? Because you kind of burnt out of the industry as well. I think that was the understanding that you'd had when you were raising the money. It's like, I don't want to do this anymore. So talk me through that and then how Stray Reflections came to be in what it is.
When I started doing this, I realized I'm not unique in what I do because there are a lot of people out there with opinions about the markets, right? But I am unique in who I am, just like you're unique in who you are. And so I made it a personal pact almost right from the heart, from a very personal space. And I was also very hesitant to really turn it into a business because I wasn't sure if I'd have something valuable to say on a consistent basis. And then I read something by Rumi which said that words are just a pretext. It's the inner bond that draws one person to another, not words. And that kind of really gave me the encouragement to just be open and transparent and let it all out. So I made it a point at the end of every issue, I'd share some personal reflection, whether it was the birth of my daughter, the death of my grandmother, visiting a friend, a reflection from a book. And I kept that up consistently from the very beginning. And I think that also informed, this idea that the more clarity we have in life, the more clarity we'll find in markets or in anything for that matter. So, I really steeped myself in the traditions and the wisdom of the ancient sages, poets, philosophers, and learning from the East and the West, and infusing that through, what's happening in the world and markets generally. So I found that fascinating just to be able to, read, reflect, and approach the present with that understanding. Because there's nothing really inspiring, frankly, about waking up and looking at Bloomberg News. But like waking up every morning, feeling inspired to just, be better, help others be better, and approach your work as a devotion, as a duty, not as a job or a career. I think that was a huge difference in the way I started thinking about this, because it really was something that I loved doing. I was fascinated by markets, but I just wanted to approach it a bit differently.
Partly it's that life is a journey, and it's the journey that you create, and some of it you don't create. And that's what I've always liked about, well, that's how I've liked to approach all of this stuff. So it's not a job. As you say, it's a devotion, it's a journey, it's the journey of life itself. And it's just one of the aspects of it. And your personal life and your work life interweave, and they're not separated. They can't be separated, which is why, your reflections weirdly fit into a macro, research service. I also loved how, I'm a big fan of kind of that, the kind of Islamic philosophy from, kind of Samarkand and that kind of golden age. And you wove a lot of that in, a lot of the teachings of the Sufis and others, you weave it in, which is the wisdom that maybe other people aren't aware of, and bring it together. I think it's a fascinating concept. Why did you think about doing that as well? Because then Stray Reflections, the book, is basically this part of it.
Yeah, I mean, the book is actually a collection of all those personal reflections over the years, right? So the book wasn't written in one go. It was basically me collating all of those end notes from each of the issues. And I think, the wisdom you're referring to is, I think, part and parcel of every wisdom. Like for me, the most inspiring author was Ralph Waldo Emerson. And you learn that he was fascinated by the Bhagavad Gita, but he also had a fascination for Hafiz. I'm from the subcontinent, and Allama Iqbal is a famous poet. He was in love with Goethe. So all these, wise people from the past, East and West, loved each other, found wisdom in each other's traditions. And I feel like there's nothing new in this world. Like everything that is relevant, that matters, that is important has already been said. And we just need to uncover all of that wisdom and bring it to the present. And so I just find myself really deeply interested in that. And again, if you look at The Money Game, written by Adam Smith, in actuality, George Goodman, he talks about the fact that the first rule of investing is to know yourself, right? And if you don't know yourself, the market's an expensive place to find out. So all of these teachings, these learnings are really just a path to this knowing oneself, right? Successful investing is only possible with knowledge of oneself. And that's kind of the journey, I guess, that I was on. It's just, getting to know myself.
So then how do you approach markets? So you've got this broader gaining of understanding of yourself, and your journey has been that in itself anyway. And your writings help other people in their journey. But then how do you look at markets? What's your methodology? And I know these things change over time and they adapt, but how do you think about analyzing markets, the macro, the big, beautiful 3D ever-changing puzzle? How do you think about that?
Yeah, it's evolved a lot as the business has sort of taken different iterations and grown over the years. And the way I approach it is this. I feel like my job is not to predict the future, it's to see the present clearly. And I do that by having lots of conversations with lots of interesting people within the community, both East and West, in different seats, whether they're CIOs of a pension fund or hedge fund of various strategies, or long only, equity credit manager. So by speaking to a lot of people, I get a sense of what's going on, what they're concerned by. And that kind of helps me figure out the research discovery flywheel. Just getting that community input of what I need to pay attention to. That's number one. I think number two is my habit and my routine. I mean, I've always wanted to work from home, and I was inspired by Hunter Thompson, who always said, beware of looking for goals, look for a way of life, and find a way to make a living within that way of life. So for me, Stray Reflections was really wanting to work from home and then try to make a way to
I
make
did
a living.
the same with GMI. It's like, can I live in Spain? How do I solve for living on the coast of Spain, still being in it? It was the same.
It's the same thing, right? So how do I create a particular habit and a routine which allows me the freedom to think and reflect? So I'm very particular about my schedule and my routine. And I'm not bombarded with a lot of emails or calls or meetings. I don't have a team that I'm responsible for. So unlike most, or practically every client that we have, I've got a very free calendar. And I've trained myself to understand that I can't know everything. I don't need to know everything. And the areas where I have knowledge gaps, I'm very comfortable trusting people that I am very fond of and I've gotten to know very personally, right? So if it's crypto, I don't need to get deep down into crypto. There are a few people that I trust, that I can speak with, and I'll have a very informed opinion. Same thing with China or biotech or others. I'll do my deep dive and write about a topic when I have a unique angle, I feel. But generally, I'm very comfortable leaning into the community and in this idea of all of us are smarter than any of us. So I feel that also helps, having this freedom to not be reactionary. Like, we like to think about this industry as being one that is filled with visionaries that can predict the future. I feel like we're actually more reactionary. And I think my focus is to be reflective and think about the second and third order effects of what's going on. And so I've got a slower pace of life and a slower pace of writing and a slower way to get things done. But I feel for our time horizon, which is generally 6 to 18 months, very directional in my orientation, it helps us get it right. And so I also, my relationship with information has changed. In the past, I used to want to consume everything, be on top of everything. And now I would say my relationship with information is more so on an as needed basis. So I know exactly what I'm going to do every single day that I wake up, when I'm going to be focused on researching or writing, and everything else doesn't matter to me. If there's anything important beyond that particular topic or subject, I trust that it'll come to me, either through my inbox or it'll come to me through our Slack community or through some other message that I receive from the clients. So anything that's important that I'm not paying attention to will come to me. I want to just focus on what I need to focus on for a particular view idea and just go deep down in that. I guess those are some of the ways, I struggle to answer the question for most people. They ask, like, what's your process? Because there isn't really, I don't have a model. I don't have macro bond. I don't have a Bloomberg terminal. Initially I couldn't afford it. And then I realized I can live without it, and I kind of like living without it. So I actually have no tools or subscriptions or models. It's just, I look at what I do more as a creative thinker, and it's developing the creative habit. And I look at writing as a craft and one of pursuing the truth. And through that process, you every now and then come to some interesting, discoveries. So my job really is to challenge beliefs that our community may have or people may have, to expand their knowledge and to just help them think about the world differently. That's how I approach it.
Really, if I think about it, I get 1 or 2 profound ideas a year, if I'm lucky. And I love it when that happens. It's the magic happens, right? The mist clears and you uncover a new truth, and whatever that means. I always love that. The information overload thing is really complex to deal with, because you need to. I always need seeds Now, you do it by speaking your community. What I try and do is see the mass of humanity and then try and think, what is the meta narrative? Not what is obvious, not why are they screaming and look at them screaming and shouting about something, but why are they? And what does that mean? And what, to go to those second and third order effects and kind of stand back and watch the crowd screaming and shouting and baying and trading and doing all of these things, and then try and figure out something. And usually there's something really big in that. I'll never forget, I got involved in climate change Twitter, climate change denial Twitter, ended up in an argument with these whole bunch of people. And I stopped because there's no point. I'm not going to change their minds. So what I want to do is understand why. So I kind of siled off a couple of people and started asking them questions. Like, who are you? Where are you from? How do you think of Pascal's dilemma? Why would that not matter to you? That, the downside of being so wrong is catastrophic. And the worst case would be you end up with a cleaner environment. Where's the downside? And then it came out from these people that what they were worried about was the taxes going up or being able to refuel their car. And it was a reflection of the crushing of the middle classes and the working classes and their disposable income and the fact that real wages hadn't risen that got me down a whole bigger journey of thinking that through. So yeah, I love that journey, that serendipity of finding something that leads to another.
For me, it's also more internal than external. What I mean by that is, again, I think this comes to the design of life, right? Whereby, the most common wisdom that you'll hear is know yourself. But I think it's missing the next sentence, which should be like, which version? Because we all have like different masks and different versions of ourselves running around. And I think one promise I made to myself was that I only want to be one Jawad, the same Jawad that's sitting with you right now, the same person that's going to be with his children later, or with friends and family otherwise. And the only way to do that, I felt, was when you're always operating from a place where your heart, mind, and tongue are aligned. And if you think about any conflict, whether it's with your spouse or a friend or with a stranger even, it's because your heart's saying something else, your mind's saying something else, and your tongue is speaking words that you don't really honor fully. And so I made it a point that I always want to be just one person. And the only way to do that is to have your heart, mind, tongue aligned. And the best way to keep that in check is to just stop lying. Not that I was a compulsive liar, but it's a nice rule to have for yourself.
But what do you mean by lying? Because that's a big statement, but you mean something behind it. Lying to who? Yourself or lying to others?
Anybody and yourself, beginning with yourself, right? So something as simple as, like if your child comes to you and says, do you have chocolate? And can I have chocolate? And instinctively we'll say, we don't have any, which is a lie because he knows there is something, right? And instead just engage for a longer conversation as to like why you shouldn't have chocolate right now. So don't lie there. It's come to the point where my wife asks me the time, and if it's 8:17, I used to say it's 8:20. Now I say it's 8:17 because even saying 8:20 is a lie. Or if I met somebody in London and I told them that I'm going to connect them with somebody and I don't do it or I forget, that's also a lie because they hold my word for what I said it was, right? But the point is, when you start living from that place of centeredness, when you read, you can pick up the difference between fact and opinion. When you can speak to some people, you can figure out when they're sort of misaligned. So I guess the news that comes to me, I can pick up much more easily, whether it's true or false, or there's a narrative here that doesn't really make sense. And it also applies to myself. So for example, if I'm having a conversation with a client and I'm talking about how I'm seeing the world, and if I get some pushback and I see myself behaving in a way internally where it's sort of misaligned, I'm like, okay, Jawad, you got to go back and do more work. So for me, the process is also much more internal, where when I read something, I can pick up on this is bullshit, or this makes sense, or this is too sensational. Like they're just making a lot of these statements that are just not true. So this idea of, I think what Byron Katie has this process of the work, right? Where you ask the question, is it true? So you read a Bloomberg article and you can ask that question multiple times through that article. Like, is it true? They're saying this, but is it really true? Do you really know for sure it's true? So having that sort of an accountability to yourselves, to what you read, to how you speak, helps me understand that, you know what, maybe I'm not in my best right now, and I need to do more work before I speak or write something.
I think lying to oneself is one of the biggest sources of conflict and stress. Lying to yourself about your capabilities, lying to yourself about a narrative that you've built that you can't let go of. And I find markets are very full of people lying to themselves. A narrative that they once thought to be true, which may not be true, they keep hold of. And as opposed to just reflecting on, okay, that's changed. Like, people dig in. It's fascinating to observe, and that's one of these observations I have about people. Who's digging in, and why are they digging in? And a lot of it's because people have lied to themselves. It's when your expectations don't meet the realities, and that's a hard thing.
And that's kind of why also I feel like I don't care to be consensus or contrarian. I don't find the value in being contrarian. I feel like I want to be independent and whatever so I can have some views that are consensus and some views that are contrarian at the same time. So arrive them as long as I arrive at them independently and well thought through. So I fundamentally believe in being agnostic, not ideological, and empirical, not dogmatic. I think that's fundamental to who I am and how I approach things. I don't have a particular agenda. And I just want to, try to get closer to the truth, right? Like there's your version of the truth, then there's my version of the truth, and then there's the divine view or the market view. So how can you get closer and closer to that, right? Because all the prophets, they all had the same lament prayer. Oh God, show us things as they are. And the only way to do that is to let go of your biases, right? And so that's what I want to do. And that's where I guess the idea of knowing oneself, the spiritual wisdom that we seek, all comes down to that. And I think that's helpful in markets. And I also think ultimately my job or my duty to the community is something, again, that the writer Anne Lamott, she was asked, what's the goal of a writer? And she said, to help others have this sense of wonder, of seeing things anew, things that can catch us off guard, that break in on our small, bordered worlds. That's kind of how I see it. That's my job, right? So I take it as a craft. I take it very seriously.
Yeah, I'm very much the same. I'm very cognizant of that. And you touched upon another point that I think is really important, and most people fail to do this, which, like you, I don't believe in being contrarian or a consensus. They're not terms that mean anything to me. So I don't read anybody's research. Just don't. I just refuse because I don't want my thought process polluted by others. If people are paying me to think, the beauty of that is I can do this independently. They're paying me to explain how I see the world, and it doesn't have to agree with them. Many of the global macro investor subscribers over the years have said, I don't agree with you most of the time, but I'm fascinated in how you got to that opinion and what does that mean for my own framework. Do you read research?
I don't get access to anything. I don't get access to any Wall Street research. Not that I'm seeking it either, frankly. But yeah, so again, it's this idea of information on an as needed basis, right? So I'm an inbox zero person, get very limited emails. I'm subscribed to, Wall Street Journal and Bloomberg and Bloomberg News, I should say, and FT and some of these journals, the papers, but not really any research per se. You get to hear what their views are generally just through the news reporting, right? Like what sort of consensus thinking is around different things. But yeah, I don't get access to research or read research as part of my process either.
Now, before we came on, we were talking about a mutual friend who was talking about quiet markets and narratives. I thought that was a very interesting observation. Again, it's just because what I'm, enjoying talking to you about is how people can think, because again, it's not what to think that's the most important thing, it's how to think. And everyone will develop their own style. But what was the conversation you were having? Don't mention who it was, but just talk about what that was.
Yeah, I mean, he was just saying, don't force it, Jawad, let it come to you. And that's part of, I feel, the luxury of what I do, which is that, in 10 years of this business, I can't think of a time when I got an email from someone saying, hey, Jawad, where's the publication? It's allowed me to really, truly be reflective. And if I don't know, I don't know. And if things aren't clear, I'll happily admit they're not clear. The benefit is I can lean on the community and admit that and allow them to give me ideas. And I think that's something that I'm tremendously grateful for, is to be having that back and forth. I make it a point to speak to as many of our clients as possible on a weekly basis. And so that really, and I travel a lot, hosting dinners and breakfasts and events to bring people together. And it's, Share Reflections is really morphed as much into an investment community and a learning community. And so just knowing that, it's okay, Jawad, take it easy and let it come to you.
And I've noticed you have gone through maybe a similar macro journey to me, going from the typical macro way, which is everything being negative, and you've actually become an optimist.
I wouldn't say I was ever macro negative. I feel like I've been bullish bearish over the years.
Yeah, I'm not talking about the bullish bearish. I'm talking about the mindset.
I don't think I'm thinking back to when I started writing, it was 2014. I don't think I've had that mindset either of being negative. Again, it comes down to that, I want to know the truth. And so even for the very beginning, I've had this notion of being independent, and I'm okay to be consensus or contrarian, agnostic, don't care to be ideological, whether it's Trump president, whether it's Xi for life, whether it's, climate change or anything that's sort of like, for me, it's like, what's actionable? What's the investment implication? I don't get into the debates of what's right or wrong, who knows? So I don't feel like the business has taken different iterations. And I think we've both been, the beginning of our journey has been similar in that Steve dropped me was hugely influential. He still has been in my life. So I think our macro business journeys have perhaps evolved together. Thinking wise, I'm not sure.
No, I mean, well, I've definitely changed how I look at the world, because I actually found my time horizons have extended. It's been I always had the traditional macro 6 to 18 month time horizon, and I've completely moved to secular almost entirely now, because I don't know, there's something, I think you've got a tailwind. It's easier. I can be dumber. I can just say it's going up. It's simpler than trying to capture the ups and downs. And I found that over time, it's given me a lot more peace of mind and better returns. The longer I've gone out the time horizon, the less competition there is for noise and markets and everything else. And you rarely have to make another decision. I might need to make a decision now about bond yields. Have they changed secularly or not? But that's the first time I've had to test that hypothesis in my entire career, which has been, it's been easy, right? And so, yeah, that's what I've found. And that's led me to become an optimist, because most of the actionable macro trends are actually optimistic trends.
So the way I think about this is, again, this idea that my task is not to see the future, it's to see the present clearly, right? So from that perspective, I realized that if you and I were sitting here in 2018, I don't think we would have predicted anything about how the next 5 years unfolded. We would not have predicted the pandemic. We would not have predicted markets doing what they did through the pandemic. Like nothing about 2018 to 2023, like negative oil prices, like nothing that happened between 2018 and 2023 we would have predicted. Or had we been sitting in 2013, 10 years ago, there's nothing between 2013 and 2023 we would have predicted. So when it comes to like long-term forecasts, I really struggle because I have no idea what 2025 would look at.
It's not long-term forecasting. You don't need to forecast if you have a trend, right? You need to have one. I'm really obsessed now with the bell curve meme, which is the moron on the left, the Jedi on the right, that both say the same thing, and all of kind of humanity in the middle overcomplicating it. And I kind of think if you can get it down to a single pure expression of simplicity that you can explain to your uncle, then you're probably right. And the moment you overcomplicate things, you're probably wrong. And I found that for secular trends, it's like technology is the most obvious one at the moment. Or maybe India. These are just so blatantly obvious. India, average age of 28, rapidly financializing everything else. The probability of the Indian stock market, excluding black swan events, going up over time, knowing what we know about all past experiences of something like that, it's pretty high. So it's like, okay, or technology. Are we going to use more technology or less technology in 10 years' time? Probability is pretty damn high. It'll be more, and the speed of it. So I've become super simplistic. I mean, totally moron-like in my simplicity.
So the way I think about this is, I'd rather focus on 6 to 18 month timeframes and stay as close to the present and the price action as possible, and keep extending that so that eventually does become the long term. But stay as close to the present, because I would argue it seems obvious now to be long America and long tech, for example, right? But it wasn't so obvious a decade ago, because a decade ago, if you think about it, post GFC, 2010, you had top economists and investors writing letters to the Fed saying, stop QE. You're going to debase the currency and create hyperinflation. So there's no policy trust. In 2011, you had the fiscal crisis and the credit rating downgrade. So there was no political trust because it was political brinkmanship. In 2012, Facebook IPO flopped, and that was a time when emerging markets were booming. China was looking good. Commodities were at all-time highs. And it was America was the easiest bearish case. And so I remind myself of that, because oftentimes, what's obvious turns out to be wrong over the next cycle.
For sure. And I mean, although I use secular as my framework, as my thought process, I use the business cycle. I'm a much more shorter term. I break it down into chunks because it stops you drifting too far when you're wrong. Because the business cycle should give you certain markers and you can test your hypothesis as you go. So I'm actually quite structured about how I do that. But I just much more enjoy how filtered down can I make any single thing. I just find that an intellectually interesting process.
And I completely agree with you on your simplicity point, right? Because that to me is everything. It's about simplifying my life as much as simplifying the writing. Like even when Thoreau wrote about, to Emerson, he said that, I've got this new idea of simplify. And Emerson said, you wrote simplify 2 extra times. Like, cut it. Just simplify once is enough. So I'm a big believer in simplicity, in communicating your ideas. That for me is a big one. And how you write too, right? And for me, the writing is a clarifying process because it kind of reveals what I don't know, what I need to know, where do I need to do more research. But it starts with like really simplifying my life and the decision making in my own life. And like that comes back to the routine, the daily routine that I sort of built for myself, where I feel like that's also allows me to be reflective and it's just different from, most people out there. It's a luxury that I get to have this routine.
And how do you teach yourself? Because I'm thinking for other people to learn from this is how do you teach yourself to absorb different views and not feel threatened by the views? Or, we see this a lot. It's another problem people have is I'm very comfortable speaking to somebody with an entirely different view to me and sitting down and really understanding it because it's interesting to me. But a lot of people find it threatening. How do you deal with that? Because you're speaking to your community a lot. There's some very smart people, very accomplished people, and some of them will have wildly different views. How do you deal with it?
I think it's more a process of becoming rather than tools or tips or techniques. Because I remember going to the first conference that I attended, that Steve Jobs ran in 2015. And I was completely starstruck with everybody there, right? And Steve trusted me to come in and give a talk. And I heard everybody's opinions. And I went back next year and I realized how many of them were wrong. Who was right? Who was making money the first year and who was losing money the next year? Like the seats kept changing, the fortunes kept changing, and so after going back to the event a number of times, which is most coveted and I think the best macro community event that I've ever been to and that currently even exists. going there a bunch of times, I realized just the importance of humility and, being able to say, I don't know, because you'd see these people that had very strong views, strong conviction, had their portfolios positioned for such an outcome and it didn't work out. Funds shutting down. So you see all of that and you realize that actually no one knows anything. We're all just trying our best to figure it out. So that was, one learning. I remember in the year 2 in 2016 of that conference, like Steve calls me up a couple of months before the event, and he's like, "I want to do a bull versus bear debate." And I've got John Burbank as the bear, who in 2016 was on top of the world. And he's like, "I can't find a bull, and I'm wondering if it's you because you're the only one I know who's young enough and dumb enough to go up against him. Would you be interested?" I'm like, "Fuck yeah, let's do it," And it just happened that I was very bullish at that time for very strong fundamental reasons. And going up against him in that debate, timing was perfect, right? This is February 2016. Markets ripped right after that. And going up against him in that debate was nerve-wracking, but given the research that I'd done, I also felt more comfortable. And after that debate, there was like a turning point for me. And that's why I say the process of becoming, because after the debate, the feedback from the community, the audience was fantastic and very encouraging. But I also realized at that point that my unconventional background, which I thought was a shortcoming, I realized in that moment was actually a core strength because it helped me view the world differently from the vast majority of Western-born and trained analysts. And so it was really embracing that. So getting more confidence. And then just the feedback that I received from Steve Dropney and Adam Levinson and Scott Bessent and a number of others, JP Stein and later many others that really sort of allow me to be who I am. And so it's really growing in confidence that kind of allows you to, one, also grow in humility, but also be able to speak your mind when you feel like you're seeing things clearly.
I think I had a similar thing at one of the Dropney conferences before I started Global Macro Investor, maybe 2003. Same kind of thing. I was, kind of early in that room. And yes, I've been running a reasonably large hedge fund. I kind of knew what I was doing. But there I was. The guy that we used to compete with on P&L was this guy called Ravi Mehra, who ran this big, it was based out of Spain. I can't remember what it was called now. And he was like the big dog in the room at the time. He was running a few $1 billion. And I ended up having quite a big, not heated, but, engaging debate with him. And again, same thing happened that I was dead right. And he was very much of the consensus view about, it was inflation, I think it was. And same thing, that led to, people like, oh, this guy's interesting. He's, he was prepared to take on the guy who was holding the whole room. And then, had a 20-minute in front of everybody debate about it all. And it kind of worked out.
What's interesting actually is a couple of months after the debate is when I first appeared on Real Vision. It was, I think, March or April of 2016. And it was Grant Williams visiting Dubai. We filmed a bunch of interviews at my house. And he interviewed me as well. And I shared my thinking, which is basically a distillation of what I had argued at that event a couple of months prior. It was just a bullish case. And even then, if you remember, everybody was quite negative. And so that bullish argument that I presented for Real Vision kind of resonated with a lot of people. And this is like what? Year 3 of the business. And you don't know this. I've never shared this before, but if it wasn't for Real Vision in that interview, I probably would not have survived as a business. Because for me,
Really?
yeah, because for me, 2016 revenue was $45,000. I think at that point, the product was priced at like $700. And after that interview, we probably got like 50 subscribers, 50, 60 subscribers, maybe something of that sort. And so the timeliness of that interview, and was serendipitous. It's the universe conspiring in your favor. So I'm grateful to you and the platform for giving me life.
Well, you also did an amazing series for us. If people go and dig into the search and look for Travels with Jawad, you went around the world and kind of took stock of what the debates were going on in various parts of the world. And And it was fun. You filmed it on your iPhone, and then we had some cameras in various places. It was like reportage of Jawad on the road. I mean, it was just great. It was a real proud moment for me for Real Vision, because we were doing something different, something that hadn't been done.
Yeah, it was a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun.
So I'm going to ask you a really difficult question now. Who are your macro heroes? Who do you think people should really pay attention to? Now, we've all been exposed to a lot of them, but who are your real macro heroes?
There used to be a time when, if there was an interview from Giant Druckenmiller, I would drop everything to just watch that interview. I don't do that anymore. That's not because I don't respect him anymore. I love him and what he's achieved. But I think, again, it's that process of becoming where you realize you don't need to have those heroes played a part in your journey, because you needed that aspiration, you needed those mentors, you needed to be striving towards something. And you can honor them and you can respect them. But I can marvel at their achievements, and they're the same from the very beginning. It's still Paul Tudor Jones and Sean Druckenmiller and Steve Cohen is definitely among them. I interviewed Steve a couple of years ago, and the most interesting thing that I found in that interview was how we can think that we're playing at our best level, but we don't realize that there's another level that exists that we don't even know exists. It's like, Nadal and Federer and Djokovic or Messi, like they're just, Bryant even, like or LeBron, they're playing at a level that we don't even know exists. And that's kind of my takeaway from that interview of Steve Cohen, because he is literally playing at a level that I don't think we understand even exists. And so from that perspective, just getting to know him better than anybody else amongst those sort of legends, I understand how it's the person, and it's not so much how their views about the market, but again, to the point of this conversation, how they think about markets, how they trade, what's going on inside their head, their heart.
I keep rereading The Alchemy of Finance, because it's a journal, real time, into how Soros is trading a series of events, and how half the time his ideas are wrong and how he deals with it. Just his ability to be long and short against himself at the same time on different time horizons is something that is unfathomable for most people. But he could trade against himself while having a core position, and he's not hedging his bets. He's got divergent time horizon bets going at the same time. I find that amazing. I really like brains that think so differently that I can't understand how they can do it. There's people. Do you know Mark Hart? Yeah, you must know Mark. Mark's another person. It's like, every time you meet him, he's moved on another 15 years in how he thinks. And I sit down with him, and my brain's blown again, and I have to go back and reconsider everything I know about whatever it is. There's a few people like that I really enjoy, and they tend not to be dogmatic people. They tend to be just these people on a journey, and they approach their journey in a very unique way. Those are the people I really, really enjoy having a conversation with. The average macro person who talks about the market, I don't really care. I don't really care whether dollar yen goes up or, whatever. But give me something to really get into. John Burbank, from time to time has been amazing for that. He was on Real Vision a lot. And he always makes you think, in a way, as you said, it's like, I wasn't even considering any of this stuff, and now suddenly I have to think about it.
I'm more interested, I think, these days, less in how people think, but how they live their life, right? Like, so how do they actually approach their craft? I'm also different in that I'm not trading, I'm not writing a book, I'm just writing. A few years into the business, I realized that actually I'm reading books on how to be a better writer, not how to be a better investor. And that was like an existential thing for me. Like, am I even qualified to provide investment advice? And I realized actually some of the world's greatest, writers and had talents that were at odds with their experience. Like, Herman Melville couldn't stand life aboard a ship, but he wrote Moby Dick. Ernest Hemingway was far away from the action, but he wrote, some of the best wartime novels. And so I just felt like can I still do this? And I realized, yes, I can, and through the help of the community. But I find myself more interested, not so much in, again, market views, but in terms of like, what's their routine? How do they wake up in the morning? What do they do first? How do they think about breathing, taking losses? So a lot of conversations that we have in the community are also related to process, and realizing that, people that are 10 years younger to me, 10 years older to me, life is difficult, just being a father at the same time as being a trader, or managing a relationship with your wife or husband. And it's tough. So I find myself, increasingly getting more and more into those sorts of conversations, because I realize I want to strive for excellence, not just at work, not just in my spiritual life, but also, I've got 3 kids, 9, 6, and 3. I want to strive for excellence as a father. I've been married 10 years. I've got friends that are struggling or finding it difficult in their relationships. I want to strive for excellence in that department. So how can I sort of do all of that to the best of my ability? And so a lot of what I feel drawn to now is, in this industry where everybody is overworked, type A, how can I help myself first, then perhaps others also get a better understanding of all these other areas of our life that need to be managed as well, and not to overweight one over the other. But yeah, the daily routine is something that I'm really into a lot. How do people go about their day?
I think the world, this journey, and again, it's a life journey for me, and it's holistic. There's a lot more to it. And I find that financial markets are just one expression of something broader. And now, whether that's, as you say, the routines that you structure, how you live your life in certain ways, I think a lot of people become as interested in that as they are in the finance. So whenever I talk about this stuff, people remember those articles a lot, because it makes them think about appraise their own lives, reflects on who they are and where they're going. Do you think that your community, Stray Reflections, will move broader because people have a need, maybe even a bigger need than just the financial ideas, but the journey of life itself?
I mean, like I refer to Anatole France, who said, "If the path be beautiful, let us not ask where it leads." So that's always been my approach, where just follow the heart and take the next best step, And then as Rumi would say, as you start to walk in the way appears. So I can certainly feel this desire within me, in all these other areas. How that manifests, I'm not exactly sure. I have an idea for a retreat next year that I'm going to be working on. That could be one thing. But generally, if I look at the community today, it's, East, West, it's pension funds, endowments, it's also hedge funds of various strategies, it's family offices, it's VCs, all generally, it's founders even, but it's generally within the world of finance. And I think currently I'm approaching it through my own self-examination. So I'll write this weekly note to self. So it started off with like these personal reflections that you find in the Stray Reflections book. And now I find myself more interested in just like fixing myself. So these notes to self, which is basically, I would say, a cross on meditations and Sufi poetry, and trying to like just, hold myself to account. And how does that morph in the future? It's tough to say, but I certainly know that there's an invitation for more of these sorts of conversations within the community, and they're certainly appreciated, like you found as well.
Jawad, listen, it's been fabulous to talk to you. I just think it's just refreshing to hear somebody think so differently and so deeply and reflect about this whole journey and what it means and how to engage in it. So hopefully people have got a lot out of this as well, just because of the frantic pace of everything that goes wrong and the news flow. To somehow sit back and reflect is actually a very good thing.
And I would say, just to descend from the mind to the heart. I think that was also huge for me from the very beginning of my journey, because it's an industry, again, where it's all about intellectual horsepower, right? And the brain and intelligence, and really valuing that, to really understanding that the heart has its own intelligence, and how can we tap into that? And so, yeah, I think that's super important. just to, understand, not just how you think, but how you feel, and
How you feel.
what does that lead to?
Fantastic. Jawad, thank you so much. Really good to see you.
Pleasure as always, Raoul. Thank you.
Jawad is an extraordinary person. As you can see, he's very different to anybody else in the macro space. Everybody else is monkeys throwing poo at each other, shouting for voices. And he's actually quiet. He's quiet and he listens and he reflects. And I think there's some real magic in that. He's built an incredible community of some of the world's most famous investors. We actually share many clients between Global Macro Investor and his service. They're very different. But people like him, and I like him because he is so different. And he really makes you stop and think. And I think thinking is a true blessing.
We hope you enjoyed the video. At Real Vision, we help you understand the complex world of finance, business, and the global economy with in-depth analysis from real experts. Join the revolution at realvision.com.